Welcome to this Throwback Thursday edition of the Disruptor Podcast. Back in March of 2021, I had the privilege to be a guest on Yolanda Albergatti's podcast, 5 Easy Things, in honor of Women's History Month. We are re-releasing the show 5 Not So Easy Things to Do to Create Bold Breakthroughs for the Advancement of Women in the Workplace. Hope you enjoy the show.
Hey, everybody. Welcome back to 5 Easy Things, the podcast. I'm Yolanda Albergatti, your host. So glad to have you on this journey where we discover and explore 5 actionable tips or hacks to help you live your best life.
Cannot wait for you to listen to my next guest. John, it's so good to have you here. Welcome.
Thank you. It's great to be here. This is the first time on a podcast guest. I'm usually in your shoes, and I am interviewing people for my podcast, The Disruptor. So this should be a fun sort of a dual podcasting host experience.
I love it. We're flipping this. Hey, we're disrupting, right? That's what you're good at. My favorite disruptor. Why don't you go ahead and tell everybody who you are, what you do, and how they can reach out to you if they'd like to.
Sure. Thanks. Yes. My name is John Kuntz. I wear a lot of hats. As I alluded to, I host a podcast show called The Disruptor, where we talk about digital disruption and disruptive events and things like that, which will dovetail in today's discussion. I do a bunch of mentoring for startups, do design thinking or sales coaching for using design thinking, and do a bunch of not-for-profit and advisory work. But during the day, I work as a sales executive for a large technology firm. And some of what we're going to talk about today came out of the research that we've been doing at that firm.
I love it. Thank you.
Oh, I didn't tell you how to get a hold of me. Yeah. Thank you. Probably the best way is LinkedIn, and you can just search for John and my last name, Kundtz.
I love it. So you and I, we have been having some amazing conversations for, over the past year or so, actually. And just to give full disclosure, John is one of our dear customers at Chuck's. We appreciate your support very much. An avid beer drinker, so we share that in common. And just an all-around really cool guy. And we got to talk to each other more because of COVID. So a nice little silver lining from COVID, and found out we have some shared passions. And before we came on today, I was just talking about how I consider John to be an ally. So this is a conversation I'm super excited to have. So share with us what 5 things you're going to talk about tonight.
Sure. I'm going to talk about 5, unfortunately, not so easy things to do to create bold breakthroughs for the advancement of women in the workplace in particular and in general.
So why I love that is because it's so timely. So as we're recording this, yesterday was Equal Pay Day. And I remember being a young, budding feminist back in the day. And it was 69 cents to the dollar. That was the thing. And here we are 20 years later, and we're at 85 cents, which I'm laughing, but it's not funny. It's really pathetic. And
it's sad and pathetic. You're absolutely right.
I'm excited to dive into the 5 things. So why don't you go ahead and start with your first one?
Can I give it just a little bit of background and context on why I think this is important? Is that okay?
Oh yeah, absolutely.
Because just so you don't think I just made all this stuff up. As I mentioned, we have a research arm within my firm called the Institute for Business Value. And we did a study back in 2019, and then we redid it again this year, focusing on women and issues in the workplace. And by the way, we're happy to share the actual report that came out that's 25 or 6 pages as part of the show notes. But we interviewed over almost 3,000 executives, both men and women within 10 industries, 9 countries, and we followed up from the study we did in 2019, and we did this all, or basically relatively recently. So we did it the fourth quarter of last year and ended it up this year. And what really hit me, and one of the reasons I wanted to talk about the 5 things we can do, is because I want to make sure people are aware of all the things that's sort of impacting it. And Londa, you will reference this. In COVID in 2020 hit everybody, but it really hit women and women of color and Hispanic women even harder. There's some statistics just to roll in your head as we try to go talk about how we fix some of these. I have some ideas, the 5 things maybe we can try to do. 1, 5 million U.S. women lost or left the job force in 2020. 86% of Hispanic women have experienced discrimination because of their ethnicity, 70% because of their gender. Black women are paid 38% less than white men and 21% less than white women. Hispanic women must work 23 months to earn what white men earn in 12. And what's really unfortunate is women of color hold just 1 in 25 C-level roles within organizations. And the other thing is, what's also so contrary is that if you do the research, organizations with the most women at the top can potentially deliver higher share performance and profits than organizations with less. And sometimes it's nearly 50% higher. So we've got this statistics that suggest that having a diverse and balanced, particularly C-suite or executive suite, will drive better shareholder value, and it'll bring more money and the companies will be more successful. But then on the other hand, we have these dismal statistics. And so that's why I thought it would be valuable to talk about the 5 things we can do to try to create breakthrough advancements. So
I love it. So I'm going to interrupt you before you dive in, because you something that I think is pivotal, right? So we hear a lot about diversity. And so we hear that term thrown around a lot, diversity. But what I noticed you said was balance. And I think that's a different dialogue. That's a different verbiage. That gives a different meaning or feeling to it. In other words, it is out of balance when there are only old white men. It's out of balance, right? And so when you have that balance, of course your company is going to do better. Of course sales will be better. Of course all those things, because you have balance, right? It's like what I love in wine and beer. I love balance.
Right. Well, and you're going to get better, more and better, I guess. I don't know if that's very good English, but you're going to get a lot more ideas, and they're going to be more innovative because instead of even because if you just have the same people looking at the same thing, you're just going to get the same idea. So by having a diverse and balanced organization or group, you're going to have ideas that and I learned this in applying design thinking. When you start like really digging into what people do and feel and say and think, and you get empathy with them, and you start to do idea generations with large groups of people, you can get that's how you come up with the breakthrough ideas. And so that's actually, to your point, I think is why the statistics lay out that these organizations that have a good balance and good diversity have better bottom lines. It's that simple.
I love it. Okay. So so go ahead, dive in. What's it?
All right. Number 1, step 1, we call it pair bold thinking with big commitments. And so what we mean by that is you want to treat gender equity and diversity as though your business survival depends on it. So and this actually goes back to my mantra and this sort of the stuff that I've been pitching on the Disruptor, which is we're in a period of great disruption today. And it's digital, right? Everything's moving quickly. And so I always like to say you're either being disrupted or you're the disruptor, right? In other words, you are either Netflix or you're Blockbuster. You're the taxi cab industry or you're Uber or Lyft. And so your business is going to depend on being disrupted or either responding to disruption or becoming a disruptor. So it just sits right in. Make it a top formal business priority. And then defend success with clear and concrete terms. Don't just, I think some of I didn't go into the reasons, but one of the reasons is we have a lot of programs and not a lot of actions. In other words, we have a lot of go to this seminar, take this class, learn this, right? Check this box, right? Oh, do your business conduct guidelines. There's a whole section on there. You can't say bad things. You can't bully. You can't, right? But we don't actually define it as in clear and concrete. And then the last is drive accountability and don't settle for acknowledgments. Going back to what I said, where people just acknowledge, oh yeah, I went to that diversity class or I took that training or I did this or nobody thinks this is a bad idea, but they don't actually do anything. So they don't pair big thinking, bold thinking with big commitments. So that's number one.
That. Yeah. So that's that disruptor thing. I love that.
And giving managers across the business measurable goals. You and I were talking about this before we started. You got to be able to see stuff before you can measure it. So part of what we're trying to do, and this is not necessarily the most comfortable thing I've ever done, is talking about this subject because I'm one of these old white guys and it's part of the problem. Or
that's right.
My tribe is or whatever. Hopefully I'm not, yes. But plurality.
Funny.
Yeah, I mean, exactly. But so you got to give people stuff. First, you got to be aware and see the problem. Then you got to be able to measure the problem because you can't measure what you can't see and you can't fix what you can't measure. One of my other mantras. So that's number one. We on to number two?
We are, whenever you're ready.
Okay. Mm-hmm. By the way, I love this format. I think this is fantastic, this five thing. Anyway, number two, insist on making room. And so what we mean by that is, and I subconsciously have done this, and now I do it more consciously, but it's make it a mantra to ask who's missing. I'm in the technology business and we're pretty good, I would say, at the management level. But when we get down into the raw technology world, part of the business, the engineers, the programmers, the architects, it's about a 90 to 10 ratio of men to women. And as part of that's a whole different conversation we could have on that. But make it a mantra to like, who's not in this meeting or who's not in this room? And then you have to adopt the practices to make sure diverse voices and points of view are included. And that goes back to what I talked before is if you get a good group together, you're going to get some great ideas. You're going to get innovative ideas, things to improve because you're going to get a wider spectrum of viewpoints, if you will.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
The second then leads into, you got to set the rules of engagement. So you got to require that your business partners are aligned with your organizational commitment. You got to get everybody in the supply chain, if you will, or the food chain to commit to improving diversity and gender equity. And then the way you do that is it's simple. You reward the rock stars and hold the line on the others. In other words, celebrate those that operationalize a diverse and inclusive workforce and remove support for those that don't. So again, insist on making room.
I love that point because it goes back to what we were talking about in terms of being an ally. Okay.
Mm-hmm.
So part of the ally's job is to be on the lookout to see who's missing and then bring that up to his peers, right? So your ally is the one who's defending you and looking out for you and has your back when you're not there.
Exactly.
By your role and there are other trailblazers, allies who are doing that, but that's really what makes that whole number two work. It's having that ally be that one to say, okay, who's missing? And now we're going to hold this team accountable for not being up or following through with the incentives and the goals that we have. So love that one. All right. Number three,
identify specific crisis-related interventions. And the way you do that is you focus on the middle, right? So you focus on like the middle management, right? The middle tier, not necessarily the entry tier and certainly not you certainly want to ultimately focus on the C-suite and the board level. But if you focus on the middle tier, fix that, it's going to propagate upwards as those people get promoted, and it's going to propagate downwards as their philosophies and just the culture and stuff is propagated down to the people that, if you will, work for them. And so again, we're going to start to get into this notion of you got to be able to measure stuff. So you seek solutions that deliver exponential gains. So and again, it's this agile concept. Move quickly, track performance with data, prioritize the initiatives that are showing tangible value. And the one, like any other sort of agile approach, which is again a technology way of doing things quickly, inexpensively, and then keeping the good and getting rid of the bad or pivoting to do better. And then again, but it got to show visible commitment. So you got to establish task force and leadership groups and things that you can start to show measurement and be visible within the organization. So that's number 3.
Number 3, yeah.
Yeah. Okay. 4?
Number 4.
Number 4. So here's where I get into the stuff that I like, is that use technology to accelerate performance. So what you want to do is you want to surface and validate the new ideas. So it's the whole idea of using these technologies that are out there disrupting the rest of the world. And one thing we learned in COVID is you could do a whole lot of things that we didn't really think we could do with a whole lot of people without having to get on airplanes and travel and bring everybody into conference rooms. I've facilitated workshops where I've done it physically, where I've flown over to Europe and I spend a day trying to recover. I run a couple of workshops and I jump on an airplane. I come home and I have no idea what day it is. But now I can pull people in and I can do surveys and virtual jams and design thinking sessions and do all this brainstorming and crowdsource and all these sort of disruptive technologies that are actually building the Ubers and the Airbnbs and the Netflix and you name it, the world that is disrupting the technology world. We can take advantage of those technologies and use it to surface and validate the ideas. So I always like to say, separate your idea generation from your idea prioritization and judging. So you generate a lot of ideas and then you judge them and then you prioritize them. And that allows you to expand your routes to market. So you can invest in collaborative tools. There are lots of collaborative tools like Slack and Zoom and Trello, and we use Mural, which is a sort of really cool. Think of it as a giant whiteboard where you would stick sticky notes, but you're doing it electronically. And we had to encompass all those technologies because of the pandemic, because we're all of a sudden working virtually. But now we can continue to take advantage of that stuff and continue to expand those routes using these sort of collaborative tools. And then hardwire fairness into the screening. So this one I love because another podcast that I hosted was a friend of mine, Judge Ray Hedden, and he's discovered that there's a bunch of institutional racism in the judicial system. But the problem is he can't prove it. It's all subjective and they know it's there, but nobody has the data because they never bothered to capture the data. So it might take, so this idea is use things like artificial intelligence to flag gender and age and ethnicity biased languages. Because a lot of this stuff we don't do intentional, to be honest. But we don't, some people just don't know better. Some people do, but I think most people are trying to do the right things. They just haven't been made aware of what they're doing is maybe not the right verbiage or the right sentence and stuff. So you can start to use AI to look at job posts and other things that you write and all these kind of things that could potentially give this sort of implicit bias or truly a sort of institutional bias that we, like I said, can't fix unless you can see it and measure it. So that's the technology piece of this on step 4.
2 things. One, I almost feel like the COVID situation has facilitated the change that's required to move to that next level. So if you think about all of the social unrest, the racial social unrest, it happened in such a way that now it's in people's faces in a way that it never was before. And it opened up this dialogue and this conversation. Some authentic things have happened and this exchange has been made. And then you look at with women in the workforce. So unfortunately, most women are penalized for childbirth, right?
Yeah.
But if we have this technology that allows a woman who desires to be able to be very flexible in her work and still be able to be at home and run that conference, it changes the whole dynamic, right? So I love that technology can be used in a way that can change things for the better, especially on this particular topic.
Well, and think about it. Let's just use working from home for the last year for some of us or more. It's all of a sudden, it's 5 years, even a year ago, you would be horrified if you were on a conference call or a video conference and your dog barked or your cat walked across your computer or your kids came flying into the room or whatever. Now we all realize that that's the reality of life because we all had to like literally pick up and go back home. And people are working in their bathtubs because they don't have any place else. They make a little desk and they sit in the bathtub because they can't work anywhere else because they got kids. So the good news about this whole mess we've been through is that now people have seen the human side of the workforce. And so if your kid comes and sits on your lap while you're trying to have a meeting, nobody cares. They don't care. It's not that we don't care. It's just the way it's like, it's okay. We know you got kids and we know you're trying to figure out how to juggle 17 balls. So I think a lot of the silver lining in this is that people all of a sudden have taken the sort of the human centric view of the workforce, which in theory should allow us to be able to be more flexible, right? Because at the end of the day, especially for knowledge workers, it's different if you're doing a physical where you've got to be working, paving a road or something. But in most of us who are in the knowledge working business, as long as we can get our work done every day, there's no reason why you can't take an hour out in the middle of the day to go, teach your kid or feed them or whatever.
Simple things like, I don't want to forget my other point, but I will say that. So simple things like the infrastructure of childcare. So childcare should be an infrastructure in this country that allows both parents flexibility, right? So we've had this problem. And one of the reasons that women have left the workforce is because we do not have an infrastructure that includes childcare. Who's going to put the kids on the bus? Who's going to get them off the bus? Who's going to be with the kids if they have to stay home at work? All this technology helps us move in a good directions.
Right.
That's great. So then I forget my point. Let me say this because I think it's crucial to understand how you can avoid bias. So I happened to be in a clubhouse room with some Mandavi's wine, the family sisters. We were talking about women in wine, of course. And so one of the things she said when they interview people, when they look at their applications, they don't know the sex of the applicant. They don't allow for that to be known by the people greeting. And then someone else in the room shared, that's how some orchestras now hold their auditions. And so they do blind auditions. They have no idea what the sex or gender is of the person playing the instrument. And what they found, surprisingly, is they hire more women. Isn't that interesting? So it goes back to what you were saying, this unconscious bias that people have. It allows for that to be done away with in many ways. So I love that point that you brought up. Okay, if you can remember your point, I didn't mean to interrupt you, but I knew I was going to forget if I just...
No, I'm good. We can go to 5 if you want.
Okay, I'm ready. Let's do 5. Right.
So number 5 is create a culture of intention. And so this goes back to the idea of you got to move away from this program mindset, right? You got a program for this. I got a diversity program. I got this program. And move away and make it a growth mindset. Let's get out of this what we've been doing is we've been taking these little baby steps and we're expecting big results, and we're never going to get them. So you've got to have a growth mindset. So you have to have leaderships across the business to just demonstrating inclusive attitudes and behaviors to drive the cultural change. You have to be an amplifier. So empower all your employees, especially the managers. That's why we talked about working in the middle first to look for ways that marginalized voices can be heard, because that's the other problem. We've all been in these meetings where there's always this one big, loud, stupid guy who thinks he knows it all, and he monopolizes the meeting because he's big and he's, talks a lot. And then there's always a sort of a shy, quiet person in the corner who has brilliant ideas, but can never get a word in edgewise. And so again, back to our technology, now there's all kinds of facilitation and techniques and co-creation.
The mute button, honey, that's what it's called.
Yeah. There's ways now to facilitate collaboration so all voices can be heard. Mm-hmm. So because we don't have to be in these meetings, like I said, where, and again, that's one of the reasons I've always tried to say, whenever I get in a situation like that, even in the old days when we were face to face, I'd say, we're going to do idea generation first. You can't judge. You just generate ideas. We'll do judging separately. And that usually helps. But now there's with technology and other collaboration techniques and just the ability to work globally, I can get people, because there's a global diversity, by the way, which I've learned in my travels I worked in every continent for business except Antarctica. And so you get this cultural diversity, which is really important. So the way they think about stuff in Germany or Finland or Sweden or South Africa or Brazil or Australia or Japan are all totally different. And so bringing those kind of people together, again, you can get this unbelievable wealth of different ideas that you would never think of, because our culture would never even go down there. We just don't have it. We've never been exposed to it. And then the last piece of this create this culture of intention is you really got to have, and we've just talked about this, you got to have the courage to embrace the discomfort. Believe me, this is not it. This is a bit of a discomfort discussion for me. Like I said, because I'm part of the people that look like me and are my age and stuff are cause this problem. Yeah. You got to admit that the change is messy. And as I always say, that's one of my mantras is disruption is messy. So you got to admit that it's messy, and you got to commit to pushing your way through it. And that's really I think at the end, like you said, you got to have this courage to realize and be able to talk about uncomfortable things or things that aren't within your comfort zone. Because that's the only way we're going to all figure out. Again, going back to you got to see the problem before you can measure the problem. You got to measure the problem in order to fix the problem. So that is the 5 things.
I love it. And let me just say, y'all need to feel uncomfortable, because we've been feeling uncomfortable for a long time. So it's your turn now.
Oh, no, I believe you. Well, it's funny because I've been in these situations, like when I did business in South Africa, and I'd go down there and I did work in Nairobi, Kenya. And then I'm all of a sudden and funny. And even as a white man, there are very few Western U.S. white people, right? The white people are usually from the UK or Europe. So it was like you had the Africans, but then you had the sort of the next minority was people from India, because there are a lot of people come into Africa to work. And then they still have the leftover people from Europe, mainly UK and maybe the Dutch and stuff. But then there's very few people from the United States. Same thing in like Japan, for instance, even more so, because all of a sudden I'm only 5'8" and I get in an elevator and I'm like 6 inches taller than everybody. It's wow. So you start to, if you put yourself in those situations globally, you'll start to understand, again, some of the things that you guys, that maybe you take for granted, or not take for granted, but you experience every day. And maybe people like me are a bit oblivious, or just unfortunately aren't paying attention.
Yeah.
So anyway, those are the 5 things that came out of this report. And as I said, we're happy to make this report available to people to read the more details. I just gave you the 5 steps. Not so easy, unfortunately. I think they should be easy, but I don't know if they are. And that's what we're hoping to be able to create bold breakthroughs for the advancement of women in the workplace or in general.
Love it. I love it. And I will put that link in the show notes so people will have access to that.
Yeah.
Thank you so much, John. So again, tell us how people can reach out to you.
Sure. The easiest way is, again, probably through LinkedIn. And I have a very unique last name, so you probably can search on that, but it's really just my first name, John, and my last name, Kun, Delta Tango Zulu, as they say in the military. But LinkedIn is send me a private message. I'll get you copies of it. I'll probably put something directly to the corporate website and the show notes, or we'll figure it out. But anyway, this has been fun, Yolanda.
Yes, you're going to be back. You've got stuff to talk about. And
yeah, this was not our original idea. It was just I pivoted in the middle of prepping for this.
But I love your original idea, so we've got to have you back on for that.
And then happy.
Do our conversation on Clubhouse. We're going to do that.
Well, yeah, you know what? While we're doing it, so I think let's put a plug in for that. So it would be fun. And maybe uncomfortable for me at least, but to continue this conversation, maybe after the podcast is released or in conjunction of it, so that we can talk live about some of these things and this is not necessarily my opinion. I agree with it, but I didn't make this stuff up. So I'm just the news reporter for this particular event. So it'd be very interesting just to get other people's perspective and feedback, and certainly I'm sure we could even feed it back to the people that wrote the stuff.
I love that idea. We will plan that for sure.
Cool.
All right. Thank you, sir. Right. Enjoy the rest of your evening.
All right. Care. Cheers.
I just want to say thank you so much to everybody who's been listening to the podcast and showing us mad love. I really appreciate your support.